So let's talk about something that is kind of a confusing and just like a subject that no one really seems to know that much about in the filmmaking community, and that is CGI and visual effects. Of course, we see them every day, whether that be in advertisements or movies, commercials. I mean, you see them all the time. Sometimes you see them and don't even notice them. And today, we're gonna kind of start jumping into that field because that is really something that excites me. Adding the visual effects to your film, really taking it to the next level of production quality and ability to tell your story. So this is all like, I've hyped it up a bunch, I'm really excited about it, but just to let y'all know, today is really more of an introductory day into 3D tracking and compositing. I'm going to be giving out some tips and tricks. Also, I'm going to be taking you completely from start to finish, grabbing your footage. And this is really simple. I film this stuff on my iPhone, so you can go ahead and get your phone out and film it. It doesn't have to be some fancy camera. In fact, iPhones are pretty good for this for really one reason. Their bitrate and everything's horrible. They have a lot of noise, but they are really good at stabilizing your footage, and it's not any kind of post-processing stabilizing. It's actually a 3-axis stabilizer that moves like it's using like a gyroscope sensor moving. So it's kind of a great tool to start off with. Everyone has one. It's simple to take footage with. Remember, if you're going to be taking your own footage, just to be smooth as possible, film in a bright area so you have the least amount of noise, and just get a couple takes. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in future episodes about visual effects supervising and stuff. But today, really just about the basics. So go grab yourself some footage, get a 3D model, and we'll jump into Cinema 4D and start this. But first, real quick, I just want to say, of course, thank you to the Patreons, assets, project files, all of that's uploaded there. And if you have any questions, that's the best place to contact me. However, I do like to respond to people on Instagram and in the YouTube comments, but my Instagram DMs are filling up pretty fast right now, so that's probably not the best place to get me. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Let's get started. And I know this is a long video, but we have a future video coming up that's going to be like a 5-part series. It's going to be like 6 hours. That's going to be the full experience. But today, I just want to introduce y'all into this world and kind of getting your feet wet, and you can kind of practice in the next week or so as I upload the next series. So let's just get started. Let's jump in. Okay guys, so now we're in Cinema 4D and it's time to actually start tracking, which is really exciting. So the first thing we want to do is go to redshift render view, and what we can do is create a redshift. Let's open that up. And if you're not using redshift, don't freak out. You can do this in Octane. You can do this with the Cinema 4D one. I just know how to do it in redshift. That's why I'm doing that. And then we're going to go to redshift lights, and then we're going to create a dome light. Awesome. And now let's go down and backplate enable, and then let's going to select our image. And if you took a video, you're going to want to export that as an image sequence for specifically just the redshift backplate. And you don't have to use an image sequence for the Cinema 4D one if it's like a H.264 file, but in this case we will have to be using one for the redshift one. So let's go ahead and do simple animation and frame rate 24, detect frames. And let's go ahead and punch Shift D, Control D, and let's make sure our composition frame rate is 24 as well, or else some stuff is going to get out of sync and it's going to mess everything up. Awesome. So we have our backplate enabled, and then we want to go to alpha. Okay, so this is important. Alpha channel replace, make sure that is selected, and we'll get into that a little bit later. That's more of the rendering side of things. Let's get into the 3D tracking side of things now that we just set that up. So let's go to, I already have it, but if you need to, you can go to Window Customizations and then Custom Layouts, and then go to Motion Tracking. I'm going to just load a motion tracker in. I'm going to go to my footage. I'm going to drag in my footage right here. Got it off to the side. And okay, cool. So we pulled in our footage. And this is iPhone footage. And it is not ideal to track. You would really ideally want to shoot, you'd want to track like a 12-bit or a 10-bit RAW file. And this is a H.264 compressed file. So 8-bit compressed as well. So it's not ideal. You can see when we zoom in, if I grab our mouse, look at all of the noise that's going on. Look how all the colors smudge around together. This is just not good footage to track, unfortunately. But it's what we got, so that's what we're going to deal with. And actually, this is a pretty easy scenario for the track because we have all these contrast points on these keyboards and everything, and that's kind of why I selected this for y'all, so we could kind of just easily track something like this. So let's go to 2D tracking, and then let's go to create auto tracks. And what it's going to do is just create all these little points, and let's auto track those points forward and backwards. It's going to process every single frame. Remember, the bigger your file, the longer this will take, so the longer it will slow down your production. Like when you're working with 6K files, this will take a couple of minutes sometimes, depending on how many frames you have. So just keep that in mind. That is the benefit to having this iPhone footage. And real quick, some rules of 3D tracking. First one is when we 3D solve, we'll get into that. I'm going to go ahead and change all of this right now so we remember to do it. After our 2D track runs, we'll be able to 3D solve. And that is when you're on set, whether it's you on set or you're just doing this by yourself, whatever it is, you need to know this, guys. You need to know your focal length, and you need to do known and constant. You need to know your focal length, and you need to know your sensor size. So our sensor size 36, our focal length 35, and that's going to play a big role in solving the camera. These are just things you will start learning to do as a visual effects supervisor. Cool. So our 2D track finished while I was talking about that, and we can just scrub through and look at everything. So you do not want points that slip. These points will mess us up, and I can just I'm going to go ahead and say that if we select our lasso tool, we can just click on one and just watch it if we want, just by punching play. And that one's holding pretty well, despite being on the edge. These look like they might slip. Things on edges like this slip a lot, so I would keep an eye on that. But I will say Cinema 4D R21 has an amazing 3D tracker. This one slips. It's actually hard to tell because our footage is so noisy. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and delete those because I just don't want to deal with that. Something on the edge like this. Okay, so it actually grabbed onto a dust point. So that was interesting that it was able to pull out that detail. So it actually didn't slip. Let's look at these on this reflection. This is a reflective surface. It's very glossy, but there's not a lot of light, harsh light hitting it. So it's pretty evenly lit. The reflections aren't crazy. So it looks like it tracked the reflections pretty well. Usually you do not want to track reflections, but that looks like it held pretty well. Cool. And just let's look at some of the stuff on this computer screen because this looks a little scary. Nope. Okay, it held well. So it looks like all these points that I'm just selecting are holding nicely. And let's just click this one right here. Let's take a look at this right here. And really, guys, it's just looking at all your points, making sure nothing's slipping. And then let's slide through. And we lose some tracking points. So what we can do is go to motion tracker, 2D tracking, and we can create auto tracks right here. And then what we can do is just select one of them and just select them all. And let's just highlight them. And let's do auto track. So now we're going to try to auto track those new points forward and backwards, adding more into our scene and hopefully getting us a little bit more geometry information. And if this doesn't work, we can always just use what we had because that probably will work out. But I just wanted to show you all this method because it's kind of important in some scenes. If your camera's moving a lot, if it turns around or something, and you want to hold some tracking points, that's what you're going to want to do is these like double auto tracks. So it's processing our frames right here, you can see. And I talked a little bit about the focal length and stuff, but guys, I cannot stress that enough. And we'll demonstrate in redshift when I open it up what is going to happen if it's off. So we're still processing frames, very fun. Okay, so like I said, we need this redshift dome light. Okay, we got it, and make sure it's an animation and you have detect frames on. Cool. Still processing frames, awesome. What we can do while this is processing, and we'll just set up our render settings. So let's go to redshift, and then in your save, make sure that you have alpha channel selected. And because you're doing alphas and stuff, I would just recommend going with EXR files. That's the best thing, industry standard for visual effects. That's really what you need to be working in if you're compositing some stuff like this. Let's click back on our motion tracker. And okay. Looks like a lot of them held. This one might have slipped. We'll watch it. Nope. Okay, it's working well. So now that we got all that in, let's go ahead and let's create a plane. And you can't just throw in any plane, any direction. It needs to be the same perspective, because remember, we're working in 3D space. And before we do that, like I said, guys, make sure 35, this is 36, 35. That's because I know that this is for my particular iPhone model. This is the solve that we need to do. If this is not correct, it will not work. Your perspective will be off and it'll look really strange. So let's run the 3D solver. And usually the 3D solver is very quick in what we're doing. So now what we're going to do after this 3D solve finishes is we're going to create a planar constraint. Awesome. So let's create a planar constraint right here. And let's select some points that we think are going to hold well. Here, here, and here. Let's just create a plane and see what it looks like. Okay, it looks lined up pretty well. And let's make sure that our camera looks well as well. Awesome, so you can actually see a geometrical construction of our scene. It's pretty good. All these red tracks are a little off, but you can see our keyboard right here, and you can see our screen right here. And then you can see in the background some of the geometry and perspective being created, and then our camera is right here. Also, you can change the orientation of this plane, but it already, I think Y plus was the right orientation. And you can, guys, it's really cool. You can even see the keys on the keyboard right there, which is really interesting. You can create meshes and stuff from this, but we're not going to be doing that. We're going to just be sticking with this right here. Okay, so just to confirm the track, I dropped some objects in, and you can see we can play through and watch them. And if it's not playing back at 24 FPS like here, it's not doing that, I would recommend you just exporting this out. But I've done this before, so I know it holds, and you can just kind of see these points holding nicely. We can skip through. Looks really cool, and you can see the camera path right there. Awesome. So, and this is where the redshift render view comes in. So it is crucial that these are matching up. You want to make sure that these are in position in the same spot, because if they're not, and there's a couple reasons they could not be. One is that your focal length is off and your sensor size is off. And if they're off, that these will be aligned differently. So let's say that this capsule is over here and this plane is over here too. They're not going to move correctly in 3D space. So you need to make sure that it's matching each other. And this is kind of just a confirmation that they're matched up. Look, you can see right here, our key right here is the same key. Our capsule's in the same spot. Awesome. So that worked. Another thing is, another reason they cannot be in the same spot, for some reason, sometimes Cinema 4D just offsets these. And then that will mess up our redshift render view when we punch play. You can see how that's offset. And now if we play through, you can see how it's just wiggling all around like that. I don't know why that happens. Sometimes it's very annoying, and it stumped me a lot in the beginning because I would get a good track here, but in Redshift, when I'd open it up, it would look differently. And if you're using Octane or the physical render, same stuff, guys. You need to make sure that it's matching up perfectly. Cool. So we have a great track, and it's held well. The problem is just if we look at our render view right here, and I'm going to actually pull this in because we're going to be talking more about the lighting setup and everything. And we can actually make that really small. So here's the problem. We have this just horrible lighting setup. This does not actually feel like it's in the scene. And there's a couple reasons for that. First one is, let's go over to Redshift and make sure that you're in the proper GI. So we'll just brute force, and then we'll leave it in brute force for now. When we export, we can brute force both channels or radiant point cache the second channel if we want to. And nothing changed much. That's fine because, well, we don't have really a good lighting setup, and we don't have this plane in the proper orientation really for what we want. And we want this plane to catch the shadows. That's why we created it. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this capsule. And let's go ahead and let's make this plane editable by punching C. And we'll punch C right there. Cool. So we want this plane to be on this plane right here. Basically, we want to match this plane up with this plane. So we're going to match this up with the keyboard. And what that's going to allow us to do is, let's go into our point mode. And let's select the points of this plane. And I want to make sure that we're staying in perspective on the same plane as this plane when we're moving these points around. Remember, we just created this plane at the same perspective. We don't want to change it accidentally. So let's pull these out. Whoops, that was not the key to press. And just make sure that we're filling up the full plane, but we don't want to go over any. And the reason we don't want to go over any is because we don't want to catch shadows in midair, because that's what we'll be doing over there if the plane is there. So we really just want to restrict our shadows to this viewpoint or viewport right here of the computer screen. I hope that made sense. Okay. Sometimes I say something and I'm like using the wrong vocabulary. Cool. Okay. And if you want to, just for fun, you can see if the plane holds, even though we already know it does. Yeah, it looks nice. What we can do here is pull that way some. And then let's go back out right here. And this is much easier than rotating and stuff because this plane has a specific PSR and we don't want to mess it up. We'll just stretch it out instead of rotating and transforming it. Because if this plane gets off of these points at any point, if it comes at a different rotation, it'll be a different perspective and the shadow catching will be messed up and it'll look really funky. Cool. Okay, so we have the plane created. Now let's create some shadow catching. Let's left click on this and we're going to assign it a redshift object, and I believe Octane objects will do the same thing. I actually never did any compositing inside of Octane. So we have our plane right here. Let's go to visibility, override, make sure you have that checked, and go to matte, override, enable. There we go. And then click shadows, enable, and then click effect alpha. And that's going to be important later on, and I'll get into that, get into all of that. But let's just create something real quick. Let's create a platonic. How about that? And this is not a redshift texturing tutorial. I've made many of those, and if you want to create some hyper realistic textures, then you can do that by looking at my procedural redshift production material tutorial. That was a mouthful. You can just check out my channel for that. Okay, cool. So now we have our object here, but there's no shadows, and that's because we don't have any lighting. It's just that basic flat lighting that is literally the worst lighting ever. So let's go ahead and create a redshift, and there's a couple things we need to understand. Is first, there was I had two light sources, the light source on my roof or on my ceiling, and the light source right next to me, which was a Yongyo light, which is a long vertical light. So we need to kind of reconstruct that. And actually there's a third light source, which is this computer screen, and we can get into that a little bit. So let's go ahead and create that. And then I'm going to jump right here. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into this view right here. I'm going to go display, and let's do quick shading, cameras, perspective. So now we can kind of just see what's going on here. And I did not mean to create an infinite light. We want to create an area light. That's my bad. And cool. And you can actually just see that it just created a shadow right there, which is pretty neat. And then what we can do is just put it right here. And look at that. We have our shadows. And it looks like our plane is not fully on. So let's take this redshift area light and let's go do coordinates. And I knew that this light was long and tall, so that's what I'm going to recreate. And the best thing we could have done is actually have held an object here and use it as a reference and take a photo of that to see what the shadows look like. However, guys, this is more about the theory behind everything and not the technical side. I will, like I said, I will be making a full video on supervising video visual effects on a production, and we'll get into all of that in that video. So subscribe if you're not subscribed, because we'll have some really cool content coming out about that. And I'm talking like some crazy awesome compositing and visual effects. But for now, it's really just the theory behind everything, because I want to make sure y'all will understand, because I'll be moving a lot faster in those videos. So let's copy that light again, and let's go ahead and let's just pull this up a little bit. And I know that this light up here, the second light, was you can see it right here, is a lot warmer. So I can go to the redshift area light, I can go to general, and I can do temperature, and I can just warm it up a bit. And that's probably a little too warm, but that's fine for what we're doing. We don't even have a material. Let's go ahead and let's go back out of this layout, customizations, layouts, and let's just do startup right here. And it's going to just close our redshift render view so we can bring it back and put it back in. And just to demonstrate some things, let me make this bigger. And let's create a redshift material. Whoops. Car paint, let's do that. That seems pretty cool. Let's drive to that on our platonic, and let's punch play. Cool, so now you can see we have this right here, and you can mess around with that. We can rotate this object. And something to be pretty clear about is that this platonic, I believe, is floating slightly, and it should be, yeah. So if you wanted it to be sitting down on the surface, you need to match it up with these points. And you can see that right here. It's obvious it's not sitting down. So just keep that in mind as well. It's all about your perspective. You kind of have to think in a 3D world at this point. So something like that looks pretty good. I'm going to turn these lights down. And you can even change the shape. You can change the decay to none, which is crazy. Linear. But I'm going to go back to inverse squared, because that's how lights are in the real world. Just change the intensity. You really want to see your shadows. It's best to film in an environment where it allows you to bring some shadows in and stuff. And that's because it will look way more realistic when you can see shadows coming off your object, rather than just a very flat lighting environment. This is really a flat lighting environment, and it's not ideal. So if we pull back out, let's click on this, and we'll zoom out again. We can see our light right here on the side. This one, it's pretty hot, so we can turn it up a little bit. And it looks like we need to shift it more like that. There we go. Cool. Like I said, this is not a material tutorial. This material is horrible, but it will do. And just for fun, if we wanted, we can create another light. Pull it right here. You could actually, I could actually have grabbed this screenshot of my laptop screen and created an image texture and made it emissive as a redshift area light. If you go right here and you go to image, you can drag in that texture, and it would have emitted these exact same colors, which would have came in so clutch if we were working on a high quality production or something like that. But we're not. We're just doing we're just messing around right now, so it's really not, it's really overkill for the scenario, the current scenario that we're presented. Whoops, upside down. Cool. And let's just move it up a little bit and around. And let's make sure that we're lining up correctly. So yeah, it's not the right perspective. Look at that, we have a little shadow right there. Of course, this light is not the right size, so let's go here. Let's go to coordinates, and let's just make it wider. Let's make it a little smaller. Just about the same size as the screen. Like I said, this is not crazy. You got to consider your environment though a little bit if you want it to look realistic. And like I said, we'll get into all those crazy details after y'all get these basics down. Cool. So let's look at this. And it's way too bright. And it's also the wrong temperature. So what we can do actually is fix both those real quick. Let's do color. Let's just pick this blue color. So now we have this blue light right there, really cool. And let's take that intensity multiplier, exposure, and just drag it down some. So now you can see this blue reflection right here. And this is really as far as I want to go. The best way to do this would really be to use a HDRI, and you take that HDRI where your CG object is. You don't take the HDRI where your camera is, because you're not adding the object where your camera is, you're adding it in this scene where you want your object to be. So that's where that would go. And cool. So this is the basics of 3D tracking. We'll go into compositing, and I'll talk about that later in the video, and I'll be using a different scene for that one that I put more effort into making realistic, so that the compositing tutorial wouldn't be wasted on something like this. Let's prepare for export. So you can do, let's go to redshift right here. You can do AOV multipasses. It's not necessary, but if you're working on high-end production, I would definitely recommend doing an AOV workflow. However, you can get away with selecting alpha channel and separating, and that's it actually, because we already did, remember what we did here. And if we click on alpha right here, we can see we got our alphas, which is what we want. And we got away with this is because, remember, let's go to our plane, we clicked object or mat ID, and remember we said affect alphas. If we didn't, we don't have our shadows, so you want to make sure that you have that selected, so we have our shadows. And then we also went to our black back plate, and let's find that's going to be our dome light. And let's go back down here, and I believe it was under general. Yes, we did alpha replace channel. See, that would have not worked out well if we didn't have that selected. So you want to make sure those two things are selected inside of redshift. Like I said, I do know I have used Octane before, and that's what I started off rendering in, but I never had gotten to compositing in Octane, so I'm not sure if the workflow is the same. I can't imagine that it's much different, because these render engines are very similar in many of the ways that they work. So yeah. And guys, remember your optimizations. I'll make a video on that if I need to. It's actually not that hard to understand redshift optimizations. Real quick, I guess if you want to get, let's stop that. If you want to get into the compositing part, you can jump over that. If you're using redshift, you can stay for a little bit, and I can explain a little bit about optimizations. However, this is a heavy and important subject that I want to devote a whole video to as well, so keep that in mind. I'll be doing a quick brush over of things. We can really dive into GI engines and how you would never want to use a photon map, and I can get into that in that bigger video. But for now, let's go to RGB, and then let's go to bucket mode. And just for the purposes of not compositing, just for the purposes of this video, let's go ahead and crank one of these lights up a lot. And that didn't do much. Oh, that's because it's off. Cool. Okay, and I just turned that up a lot so y'all can see the shadow, and that's going to be important because when you're compositing with alphas and stuff, you want this shadow to be ultra clean. And the first thing that we can do for that is, let's zoom in a lot. Okay, we can see right there, it actually looks pretty clean. Let's go into bucket mode, though it might not look so good. Yeah, doesn't look too well. So the first thing let's do is let's crank this up. Let's do 1024, and that's pretty high. And we'll let it load. Okay, so that actually didn't do much, and that's because that's not an issue. And I think if it did, it might have cleaned up. Let's turn it back down. So it cleaned up a little bit down here, but not a crazy amount. Let's go back GI. Let's go to 1024. Let's go to basic, and let's turn up, and you never want to do unified sampling first. Let's do sampling overrides, and let's turn up our light sampling rate to 256. Sometimes I go over 512. Okay, so you see how much that cleaned that up. We can do 512 if we want, depending on how much time you have to render. You just want the shadow to be really clean. Reflections, if you have those, we kind of have some reflections, so let's do 128. And you can see how I cleaned that up right there. So it's not high enough. Let's just go all the way up to 512 and made it real nice and real clean. Let's go back to our GI, and let's do a radiance point cloud. make sure everything looks nice and clean. Cool. And let's turn this all the way back down to 1. And okay, so there you can see all this noise right here. It's kind of hard to differentiate between light noise and a GI noise, but they're still the same. Let's change these bounces to 8, or sorry, 4. And if we do, let's look at that, and let's just go to something like 32. Cool, cleaned it up, but not that much. So let's do 512. Cleaned it up, still a little bit more, 1024. And that's kind of what I was looking for right there. So that was a very crude version of how you would want to kind of do this. But obviously, guys, this shadow is not right or anything. And that's a very quick overview of how you would optimize the scene for redshift. And I can make a video on that if y'all are interested. I actually really do much enjoy controlling samples. I didn't realize how much I'd like that. And also, guys, if you have motion, make sure to enable motion blur. That's going to make it look so much more realistic. That's something, yeah. And also enable deformation motion blur if you have stuff moving around. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Real quick, if we want to, we can punch render, and then we can go to info, layer, and then let's go. While it's loading our render right here, it's gonna prepare the scene. If we go over here to layer, you should see a background in an alpha, and when we get it to load, once it starts rendering, there we go. My GPU's bogged down. I'm rendering stuff in the background, but for demonstration purposes, you can see when we go to single pass, we have our alpha right there, and that's how you know you did it right. We got our shadows and our object, and then we'll get into compositing this in After Effects. I will be doing a Fusion workflow eventually. However, I'm still learning Fusion. You can see I'm actually working on a pretty interesting project right here. Inspired. Well, I'm not going to say it's inspired by, but if you follow him on YouTube, you should know he's done something very similar. And I love doing case studies that other artists have done because I can easily set up my material and everything similar to theirs. So we'll be talking about Fusion and compositing all these crazy AOVs later in a tutorial. If you're interested, I don't even know if y'all care about Fusion, but it is superior to After Effects. I will just say that. So yeah, as I say that, let's jump into After Effects because I'm not that good with Fusion. Okay guys, so there's a couple things you're going to want to do when doing this, and the first thing is to import your original footage, and that's very important because we're going to actually be grading with that and matching the color with that because it's going to give us the most latitude. It's the least untouched thing. I do recommend working with 8-bit or higher. 10-bit or higher. 8-bit is not going to really cut it if you're really pushing color around like we're about to do. So we shot this 6K NB raw, so we'll just drag this to new composition. It's just going to create a composition around that, and After Effects is currently a little buggy, but if I go over here to color, and then I'm going to go to fit right here, and we got this going on. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about color. We can see our vector scopes, our scopes right here, and I just did that by checking histogram and waveform. We'll get back into that in a little bit, but I just wanted to show you all this because we'll be working in this. Let's go back to default and just ignore this white thing. I don't know why it does that sometimes. So we'll go to File and then Import and then File. And then our sequence, I already pulled it up before, so it's still here. And we're just going to click Open EXR Sequence, Force out of alphabetical order, Create Composition. And then we want to make sure we have composition checked, pre-compose layers, contact sheet, open EXR sequence, force alphabetical order. So our footage is going to be under main right here, and just take main assembled, drag it down and on. And then let's go back to our color since this screen's not working for some reason. Okay, so it's going to be under main, so just click main right here. You're going to drag it down and then right over our original clip. So right over the B-raw clip, and don't freak out, this is normal. First, let's go over to color because that's where we're going to be working in most of the time. So we have our color right here, and the first thing we want to do is search for a compound arithmetic. And what this is going to allow us to do is to separate the RGB values. You just saw it fix itself right there. It's going to separate these RGB values, and it's kind of just going to clean stuff up and reinterpret all these different things together back where they belong. So that's kind of what's going on here. And there's a lot of stuff going on here, but mostly just know that you need to have RGBA because we rendered our alpha channel, and it kind of cleans some stuff up here. Also, if we go back to our composition right here, if you click on the footage, the sequence, and then click interpret footage, main, and then just click guess, it will clean some stuff up for you and make it look better. And I'm not really sure why you need to do this step. You just do usually because it doesn't get it right when you just first import. Okay, so let's go over here to back to our color, which is right here. And don't freak out if your scopes don't look like this. Let's move this around. It's going to take a couple seconds for these to load. So we're going to go to float because we're working in 32-bit float color space right now. So go to float. Also, you want to make sure that your projects or your preferences, and we'll go back over to default. Make sure you're in 32-bit color, guys, and that's just going to be really important for what we're about to do. So let's go back over to color. Cool. So first off, right off the bat, I rendered this out at a low resolution. I didn't want to render it at 6K because I knew that'd take forever. So I rendered it at, I believe it was at 4K. So we didn't cut it too short. Also, CGI is already really sharp right off the bat, so it's not necessary that you, we're going to be blurring it potentially. So it kind of defeats the purpose. Okay, so you're probably looking at this like, that does not look right. And you'd be correct because, and I want to explain this to you so you kind of can understand what's going on behind the scenes here. So let's go ahead and grab a Lumetri color, and this is kind of the chain that I like to use. And then let's also grab a levels. Okay, so let's talk a little bit real quick about color space and what we're about to do to our color space. So we shot this in B-RAW, and anytime you record on a camera, your camera is going to store a luminance value and a saturation and hue value. Our camera will store values between 0 and 1, which is great. That's how all cameras work. However, we were in redshift and we were rendering in 32-bit float. So float is allowing us to store values over 1. So values that would clip usually are not clipped. There's still data there floating. So really what that means is when we imported this, all those floating points that we had are now clipped. And that's fine because we still have the data there. It's not gone. It's not compressed out or anything. It's still here. And you can see it actually. It's all right here. And it's touching this 1. Look, right here we have 0. Right here we have 1. Beautiful. Also right here, if you notice, we have 1, 1, 1 for all the different saturation values of these. And that's just some nerdy stuff, but it's essential to know because we're about to start creating a grade. So the first thing we want to do before we start grading anything, we want to start matching stuff. Always match first, grade second. And then if you want to do a creative grade later, I recommend taking this into DaVinci Resolve because it has some amazing properties for that. But for now, we'll just be doing it in After Effects. So let's first talk about this. This is really, and we'll turn the scene on and off. And this is how, part of the reason I know this is because I already graded this, but I also can see right here in the middle, we got this weird line that you can see doesn't fit in with any of the other data points. Well, that's our subject right there. So if we turn it on and off, look at that. You can see how much it sticks out and distorts the data in our scopes. And this is why it's important to use these scopes. By the way, if you're not seeing this, I just click on this little toolbar and you can pull up histogram and vectorscope and waveforms, whatever you like to use. I'm just gonna use these two for now to explain kind of what's going on. Great. So we can see these data points are just all over the place, especially the reds. Whoops, wrong thing. Especially the reds, you can see them popping up right there. Well, this is actually an easy fix. The first thing we want to do is take this slider and just clamp it down some. And do you see what that did there? You see that float data is now down and lowered. And if we zoom in on our subject, I'm going to change this to full resolution. This is 6K though, so if we were playing out an animation, it'd take forever. But this is mostly just so y'all can see the YouTube compression. And I'm just going to move onto our subject so you can see it better. Okay, great. That motion blur really does sell that realistic look, I must say. So here we go. We got our levels, and you can see right there, it's a small adjustment, but it looks a little bit better now. It looks more like it's fitting, but we're far from getting it to match. So just slide this around, and this is going to be a lot of moving around. So we also have our shadow values that are too low, so we can take these up, and you can start to see, and I'm just going to slide it slowly so we can see it. So we'd probably expect this subject to be somewhere like right here. Also, if I turn these levels off, similar effects, but not exactly the same, just so you know, can be done with probably the contrast node if you want to try using that. So we'll go over the contrast right here, and I'm just going to change this back to half because it's taking so long to update. So we'll go back to this contrast node right here, and sorry, not node, so used to using nodes, but we'll take this contrast and we'll take it down to the negative. And you'll notice we're lifting our shadows up, so it's kind of doing some stuff, but not exactly the same thing, but it is still a way to move this data around. So I just wanted you to know that. I kind of approach it with the levels and the contrast. So let's just do the levels again. And we're just going to squeeze these float points in where they belong. Whoops. That's a little too high. So we'll just move it around. And it's really just about matching your scene with your eyes, but also with your scopes, because they're both tools that we are using. So let's take the levels up a little bit more, and it's really just about fitting into our scene. Cool. And we can also adjust the saturation here, but I like to actually grab a hue saturation slider just because it kind of just separates it out, so I can quickly grab it if I need to. And then let's take our master saturation and start pulling it down. And you can see, if you look right here, here's the saturation of this. And watch it just work its way down. Cool. So that looks pretty close right there. We might have taken a little bit too much saturation out, but that's okay, because we're going to be creating a new adjustment layer. And this is going to affect both our footage, and you just do that by left clicking new adjustment layer, and this is going to affect both our footage and our robot. And the reason we're doing this is we've matched them together, and now we want to squeeze them back together. So we shot this in log, so we had the most ability to move the color around, and then when we rendered this in 32-bit color, so we had the most ability to move the color around. So we had the most latitude on both our background and our subject. So what that really allowed us to do is that gave us the opportunity to kind of stretch and bend them back together. If that made any sense at all, please let me know down below. But it makes sense to me. I hope it makes sense to you. So we're really just giving ourselves the most latitude to kind of push these two colors. We got to pull them apart and then push them back together. So that's kind of what we're doing. We match this one to this one. And then let me just turn all these on and off real quick so you can see it happen. So we started with something like this, which too much saturation, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And then we did some here, did some here, did some here. Okay, cool. And now we're going to go up to this adjustment layer and affect both of the layers. So with that, we're going to want to grab a couple of things. And let's just go ahead and grab the Lumetri color again. And let's just stick with it for now. Let's go to basic correction. Increase the contrast, and now you can see our scope is separating, but they're separating together, which is a good thing. So we're increasing our contrast. Okay, looking good right there. And then maybe decrease our shadows a bit. And then let's grab a saturation node. Saturation slider. Been working in Fusion a lot too. Master saturation. And we can take it down just to see. Let's take it back up. Let's keep going. Okay. So it looks like that our subject is still a little too saturated as we pull this up and kind of see. So it looks pretty nice right now. So we're going to jump back to our subject and kind of just see what happens if we pull this down just a bit. That's a little too much. Let's go back up some. Okay. That looks pretty good right there. So now we can see that it's believable, at least, that it kind of would fit in this scene. Now, I have a little bit of problems. First off, the shadows aren't really matching up, and it looks like there might be a different color tint going on. Also, there might be some chromatic aberration that we're missing, and all these things can be added, and also definitely some denoising and then grain. And I'll kind of get into that. So let's first start with my method for softening this up. And let's just go back to full. And this is going to take a long time to update, guys, but I just want y'all to see this. So we're at full resolution right now. And you can see how, even though we rendered this at a lower resolution, look at all the detail we can make out. And then if we go to like the ground under the subject, look at that. This is so blurry and like not clear, but this is so sharp, even though there are different details. So what's that telling me is we need to kind of soften this up. And I actually like to do this with the denoising slider, because usually you'll denoise your footage before you start color grading and stuff anyways. So it kind of just gives it that look. So I think if we grab the grain node, if we just search grain, and let's just bring this up a little bit by sliding this. Okay, grain. And we have add grain, match grain, remove grain. We're actually going to be using almost all of these. So let's first get the remove grain. And this is going to be really funky. Y'all are going to think this is weird, but we're going to remove grain from our subject that doesn't have any grain on it. And we're just really just going to be softening it if you ever used any denoising. So we're just going to crank this noise reduction up crazy high. And then I like having this preview box here because you can kind of see the before and after. So it's doing a little bit, but it's not quite great. Okay. Okay, so that did a lot more. That really softened it up. And we're going to just do a little bit more. Okay, so that really did it right there. That's really what we're looking for. This looks blurry and not right. There's also some fine tuning. We can crank up chroma suppression if we want. And that took out a lot of detail. We'll just do the before and after. It says before. This is after. So it just made our footage blurry. And it just messed up all that detail we created, guys. But that's important because that's really what the lens is doing. And that's really what the camera's doing. You can see how it's kind of just like everything's out of focus. It's not really looking sharp and stuff. So that's really what we're just trying to do here. Texture, we don't really want to change that. And then there's temporal filtering, unsharpening mask, sampling, blend with original. So maybe it's a little too much. We can slide that around. We'll leave it like that though, because that really just softened it up and made it look like it should. Cool. Okay. So let's jump back out, and I'm just going to change this remove grain to just final output so we can see it on our full subject. Okay, awesome. So now that we've kind of messed it up, we took away our precious, sharp, crispy detail, and we've kind of just fudged some stuff up and then kind of adjusted the color. We're going to go back to the color because I find that it's always good doing a second pass on your color and shadows and really just trying to match stuff up together. So we're going to just grab this hand. And it looks like this matches pretty well. It looks like it fits pretty nicely. And I wish I could play this for y'all, which I can technically, but it will take forever to update. We can go to quarter resolution. That's one of the downsides of working with 6K is it just slows the whole process down, but it really does give you a lot of latitude in what you're able to do. And we can see our thing dancing there. And, okay. It's critique time. Some stuff that I learned from this and some stuff that we can maybe improve on next time. First off, guys, this is not an ideal lighting situation for CGI. Direct lighting just never really looks well, and it just isn't flattering. Technically, if we're 2 pixel peep here, these pixels really are matching up with our scene. We can maybe add a little bit more contrast here and here, but I'm looking at these shadows out in the open and it looks like they're matching up pretty good. Another thing is, let me go back to full resolution. It's going to take a long time to update. I remember that. And we'll zoom in here and I want to explain this chromatic aberration. Look at that. See that right there, guys? That is a crap ton of chromatic aberration. And if we look at just everywhere. If we look on our guy right here, nothing. We should be seeing that. And you can barely see it if you zoom all the way out. I'm sure it's not coming through YouTube compression. So that's another thing we can add in too. But I wanted to keep this part fairly quick just so y'all could get the basics of everything and start compositing yourself and also exploring. One last thing to do though, and I'd really feel bad if I didn't do this. Let's go to grain and let's add that grain in. And you can go in and dive in through the grain settings and design your own grain, or you can just go, let's click preview mode, and then let's drag that over our CG character and then over our actual footage, and let's just zoom in some. Make sure you're on full resolution for something like this because it really does make a difference. So we can design our own grain, or we can go to preset and just choose one. So definitely not that. Let's do a Kodak. Kodak Vision, and then let's go to, and obviously we don't have a noise like this, so let's go over to color and let's do saturation. Let's turn that all the way down to 0, and then let's take the let's move to something else and just experimenting. So yeah, it's adding a lot of noise in too. We can do the tint amount, change that all the way to 0. And then take the intensity, change that down, and blend with original. We can go to screen, and then punch play, and let's see. Oh yeah, it's not gonna play for sure. Let's do a quarter, maybe. Yeah, you can't even see it at a quarter. And really, what that's gonna happen is this grain will not come through YouTube compression. When the compression algorithm runs, though, it will see this grain here and it will start clumping it together, and it'll slightly change that compression. So if you're uploading to a video sharing service like YouTube, it still does help to add it because it makes that compression algorithm think and work a little bit and start clumping stuff together like there is grain there. And there's all these, look at all these different types. Negative, I like that one a lot. And I always like to take maybe the size of it, and let's do like a 0.5 size, and then crank up the softness. A little too much softness. And then take the intensity down to maybe 0.4. And it's really starting to blend it now. That looks really nice, and that's gonna be really nice in the CG. And let's go ahead and just add this before all of our effects. Cool. I actually don't want to do it before the compound or rhythmic because that is an important one that we don't want to disrupt. So that remove grain node, you can see when we change it before and after, we can add grain and then denoise it, and that also softens it up quite a bit. So that's something to consider also, but we're just going to leave it after. Technically, if you wanted to, you could add grain, remove the grain, and then add grain on top, and that sounds really weird, but that's simulating you shooting with a camera, denoising, and then re-adding grain in, which if you're a colorist, you know that you always add grain back after you denoise because it will look too smooth. But the reason you don't want to add grain before you start color grading is, and we're talking about actual footage here, is because when you start keying skin tones and stuff, it will start to mess up your keys, and your key can't get a good hit on what colors it should be, and it'll just be a splotchy mess. So yeah, that's a little bit about color science right there. And then let's just go to this grain right here and go to final output. And that's it, guys. That's the full thing right there. And I'm pretty happy with this. It definitely could be way better. Some ways to improve this. Let's talk a little bit about that. Getting an HDRI, that's pretty essential. That would really help us out a lot. Not only that, but maybe getting a chrome ball, taking a picture of it, seeing how the sun looks on it, and then when we start building the scene in 3D, we can use that chrome ball. Another thing that came in handy, guys, and I didn't go over this process, but this color checker right here. And this is when you start cutting multiple scenes together in your film. You can see we can check for our lens's chromatic aberration. So you can see right there. Also, we can grab our balance with our gray card. And then we can also, and I'll just make this window bigger so y'all can see all of this, because I know it's small on YouTube. Cool. Hey guys. Okay, we're getting there. Oh, I gotta center it up, of course. Cinematographer. And then, okay, so we have this right here for pulling different, and I hate that this black is reflective. I don't know why they did that. That annoys me. But for pulling different shades and kind of just matching our exposures. And then really this is the one, and I can do a whole video over this if y'all are interested in this. But this, I think it's actually supposed to be oriented like this. This color checker right here, you can take into DaVinci Resolve, and it has a special color grading node designed for this. And you just drag a box over this, and it matches up all the colors from your camera to how they're supposed to be, because it has a picture of this already inside the program that knows what the colors are like. So it will take those colors from the program and then take these colors and cross-reference them together, and it'll go, okay, wait, this green is a little too bright, so I'm going to change that. This blue is a little too saturated, I'm going to change that. This blue has not enough luminance, I'm going to change that. And it's going to change that about all these channels. And then you can see right here, these are all of our skin tones. It's going to go over the skin tones. It's amazing. These are different brightness values. And yeah, it is a essential thing if you're a visual effects artist. Definitely. And if you're a colorist, I would definitely say you're going to need one of these. And if you're just messing around, you don't have to have it, but it will come in handy. And these aren't cheap. This was, I think, like $150. I'll probably end up doing a whole video out of it. I freaking love this, but I'll just tell you a little bit about it. It's the color checker and passport. So I actually use that workflow in DaVinci Resolve. I don't really like doing the After Effects stuff, but just so you know, there it is. That's kind of how you do that. And then if we're going to export this, I'll get back on subject here just before we end the video. Some tips. If we're going to export this, I would recommend exporting it without this. Because what that's going to allow you to do is go back and color grade this inside Resolve or inside Premiere or Final Cut, whatever you like to use. But we're really just, the reason we did this adjustment layer, first we created just a quick stupid look. It didn't look great, but we're really just stress testing it to see if our colorist, or if when we start grading it, what's going to happen to the image. Are the shadows going to pull apart and not match, or are they going to push together like they should? Is the saturation values going to be different than what we expected them to be, or are they going to maintain the same? And that grain looks so good in there. I'm so glad we added that in. That really sells the look right there. What's going to happen to the hue? Is the hue going to push apart? And it kind of did a little bit, actually. Our hue is a little different. And if we go to our main, and at least not what I had pictured in my mind. So we can go to hue saturation right here and just change our master hue just a bit. Taking way too long to process. Way too long to process, guys. This is ridiculous. I guess this is why you don't work with 6K footage. Yes, you can mess with the hue a little bit. And we leave all the effects on this layer. Don't get me wrong. If we take all these off, look how horrible it's going to be. Guys, what is that? So look at the before and after. This is before we started grading, guys. This is what it looked like. And then let's add our effects back on the main clip. So this is us trying to match it and resolve. And then this is the final just stress test. but just that before is just horrible. If we take this off, just look at that. You can't match, these colors don't match. And then when you export, if you were to just go ahead and export this, your colors would have to try to qualify and key this color. It's just going to be a mess. It will be a complete mess. Yeah, look at that. It looks like it fits a little bit. It might need a little bit more contrast. It's hard to tell with this vlog, trying to emulate it. But once we apply our grade, we can kind of see it pushed everything together. So yeah, that's the importance right there, guys. That is the difference between CGI and like getting away with CGI. You know what I mean? It's like obvious, stupid CGI. This is this right here. But this right here, you can start to get away and sell. Just kind of update so you can see. There we go. Yeah, you can get away with something like this. Okay, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Long series, I know, but I really think that it helped out with everything. So please leave a like if you want. You can support me on Patreon. That would be awesome. I always upload project files there. I upload videos there first, and sometimes I upload exclusive videos if I just feel like throwing something together real quick. And unfortunately, YouTube doesn't always take these videos and make them super successful, but they're still sometimes really informative. So sometimes I just throw some videos like that onto Patreon. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. If not, I will see you in the next video. I'll see you in the next video no matter what. So thanks guys for watching. Peace out.